So the idea here is we were going to talk about winners and losers, and I thought that I would try to wake you up, since we are always the last presentation of the day, and waking you up by presenting a pretty sharply worded hypothesis, which is that one of the losers is going to be Netflix. And one of the losers is going to be Netflix. And so what I did is I tried to aggregate some anecdotal and circumstantial evidence in support of that hypothesis, but I'm open to a good discussion around it. However, when I started, I went back to a presentation that I gave at this same event a couple of years ago, and this is what I say: I believe Netflix could fade after being the innovator that rapidly changed the format of video distribution. Basically, that a pure player such as Netflix, notwithstanding the fact that they are expanding into production, have difficulty in sustaining their position in the current value chain. Secondly, that multi-homing costs are somewhat low. You know that one of the conditions of a winner-take-all market is that multi-homing costs, the ability of you holding two platforms such as Netflix and Amazon, will be too high, and therefore you stick with one, and therefore network effects are strong, and you have a higher barrier to entry. And I was saying, well, I think that multi-homing costs are low in this sector. There's piracy. There are players that are much better endowed than Netflix is, and therefore have scale in order to mount an attack over them. And some of them are actually subsidizing the video business with the purpose of capturing larger portions of the digital market, particularly on advertising, talking about Google and Amazon. And so the net of the story would be that they would have been the disruptive innovator that come up with an innovative business model, but ultimately the way things work is over time there's going to be a consolidation, and after them having the creativity of the destruction side of the equation, we're going to be taken out. So that was a little bit the hypothesis that I raised in 2014. So let's see what happened and whether there's somewhat of a confirmation. So what has happened with Netflix ever since from a subscriber standpoint? I'm focusing more on the top lines. I mean, the way they in their income statement, you can see the total domestic streaming customers and those that pay. Like my son doesn't pay; he piggybacks on my account, and as many of your children do. And whatever. And then the other one, the lower one, is international. So what happened was that, particularly towards July, there was a hiccup. June, on the second quarter, there was a hiccup. There was a slowdown in growth. And this caused the jitters in the marketplace because the stock actually dropped dramatically. They dropped substantially, and partly on the reason that Netflix was viewed as a growth stock. And they missed by 30% their estimates of growth in the number of subscribers. So people got sort of nervous. That's where the value went down. And immediately after, or I think that probably a month ago, rumors started going around of a potential bid on the parts of either Disney or Google. So them being taken out. Now, the first question that comes to mind is, why is it that subscriber growth is dropping? And I think that there is the intensity of competition. I mean, the reasons are several, or two primarily. One is that they stopped their grandfathering. So if you were renewing your subscription, you weren't getting the old price, you were actually being hit by a price increase. And then you were having more competition on the part of Amazon, Hulu, and less so on Apple. But more importantly, as I was saying before, and it's confirmed, multi-homing costs are very low. Like 40% of households access more than one OTT service, and that was 25% in 2015. See the kind of growth. That means that we at home go for Amazon, go for Netflix, and we might even go for a third provider. So low multi-homing costs, big competition, that was hitting them. So what Netflix did last year was saying, well, we see it coming, we're going to compensate the losses that we're having in the domestic market by going overseas. And they announced an expansion in 130 countries, massive expansion overseas. Now, easy said, Easy said, because this has also problems. One is the infrastructure deployment. And I was very interested in Professor Mitra's discussion, because I've been on the side of deploying IXPs overseas and trying to negotiate with them, bring your content to the cache. And there's an interesting equation. I think that despite the fact of the hierarchical cache, as soon as you open the IXP, they want to bring the content right away. And the IXP has an incentive to lower the prices as much as they can, because we need to break even on the fixed cost of the data center. So we wanted to create a lot of interconnection traffic. So lowering prices, there was like instantly the willingness on their part to bring content to the location. In addition to the fact that when they do the mirroring and the update of the cache, that occurs at 3 o'clock in the morning more or less, prices of fiber internationally are dropping big time for the big links. So economically, this made a lot of sense in the world. The problem was that they were facing a lot more competition on another dimension, which was the diversity of content. And I'm going to give you an example of what we saw in Latin America. So this is the situation in Latin America. You see that Netflix has close to 6 million subs, paying subs. And then you have, and I put here examples of these, approximately 140 OTT players. From governments to pirates to cable providers to pure plays. So big time competition. To what extent they would be able to compete with Netflix, even though Netflix would be willing to increase the size of the cache? Where they compete is on the diversity thing. And we're very interested on a particular case, which was Claro Video, which is essentially, this is Slim, competing with Netflix directly. And we looked at the first thing we looked at is market shares. And look at the market share of Netflix over a year. They dropped in Mexico, 64% to 51%. Why is it that market shares why is it that they are losing subscribers? So we went to actually look at the catalogs. And we counted every single item of their both catalogs of Claro and Netflix. And what we noticed was that the local content on the Claro side was 26% versus in Netflix 8%. Yeah, excuse me, 8%. So it's not the economics that are driving their disadvantage, it's the fact that from a diversity standpoint, what the local players are doing is breaking the network effect. People tend to go to Claro because that's where they find the movies that are either in Spanish or Portuguese, as opposed to going to this, which is basically what they give them. It's Hollywood and a couple of local productions, but not more than that. So they're losing overseas. They're having this declining growth in the US. And if you look at it from a purely value chain standpoint, what you see is that you see a big time, vertical moves on a number of players, but particularly Google, Apple, Facebook, even Verizon. And these guys are pretty much located here on somewhat of an isolated position. They moved into production, but they are hampered by the economics. And if you look at the scale and the cash that potentially they could have by imputing the numbers, particularly the EBITDA, these guys are so much more endowed by this that if they were to make a move, they clearly are going to displace Netflix, or they're going to acquire them. And that's why we tend to explain a little bit the moves that are occurring. I think that overall, Google moving after Netflix could be a nice complementary to what they are doing on YouTube. Potentially Disney is a way of getting and capitalizing on some of the problems that you were pointing out of disadvantages on the distribution side for a media play. So I think that this type of consolidation might make sense. In addition to the fact that I think that this is a game that is being played on a different league for Netflix. I believe that the game is being played between Google, Facebook, Apple, and Amazon. And those are the four players that are going to be driving whatever is occurring in the industry. And that Netflix could have been the good innovator that could have brought something to the equation. And in that context, I believe that video is somewhat of a subsidized point. That people are using video in order to capture what they believe to be more important, which is on the advertising revenues. And you can see that either YouTube are subsidizing it on the consumer side, Facebook is a video component of their brand building efforts, Amazon is an extension of the DVD business. So what effectively I see is video not as important as it would be relative to what these guys are fighting in their chess game, those four guys. So to sum up, I think that, I'd like to hear what you guys said, but I think that there's somewhat of a contradictory trend, because on one hand, clearly Netflix has played the role of the innovation at the periphery of the ecosystem. They brought a business model that didn't exist before, but their sustainability wasn't really easy, particularly because of a problem of scale. And the problem is that they cannot build the network effects sufficiently to raise barriers to entry. I mean, you remember in winner take all and consolidation markets, you have three conditions: large network effects, high multi-homing cost, and homogeneity in the consumer base. And what you have is heterogeneity in tastes. People want different things. Low multi-homing cost. And yeah, you have some network effects, but not enough to cancel those two, the first condition. So what happens is ultimately, there are no barriers to entry. And so what is the outcome? Further consolidation of the value chain. There might be greater diversity. So I think that when you gave the introduction this morning, we said consolidation, but you're going to have a number of satellites operating at the edges, particularly on the international basis. I think that's going to be very likely. And yeah, there's going to be more innovation. There's going to be another player, but the cycle is going to continue. Thank you. No, I can stay here.